Okay,
Hey Dick, how are you?
well, I'm still vertical. Hi, Burns.
Good to see you. We've got a little surprise for our faithful followers. We are not going to discuss politics whatsoever in this podcast. We have decided that our audience needs a respite. And so, what we're going to do is talk about our favorite places to visit. And because you're an internationalist in that regard, having visited most of the places in the world, you'll do kind of the international side of the ledger, and I'll confine myself to good old USA. So, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dick, to get us off the ground.
Okay, the first thing that comes to mind, and I wanted to touch on it, is how to pack for traveling. But before we go into how to pack, one needs to look at the different ways to travel. Now, my wife and I have been to 142 countries so far, which is pretty much all the countries and territories in the world. But a couple of things we've learned. Pack light. And when we say light, don't even bother to pack toothpaste and other items. You can buy them in country and then throw them away. The plane will normally give you free toothbrush and toothpaste. So that's the first thing. Anything that you can buy in country, buy in country. Don't pack it, because if you're like me, you'll never use it. 3 pairs of pants, because I figure a pair of pants, in case I spill on it, it's good for 3 days. And oh, by the way, my wife has a thing that no trip can exceed 2 weeks. So, just don't pack pants. If you need pants, you can buy them. I mean, it's not like you're going to go and visit the third world. That's issue number one. Issue number two is we always fly business class. It's like first class, but a hell of a lot cheaper. But almost all the ones I like now have sleeper beds where you can take an Ambien, drink a glass of wine, and sleep during the whole trip. I mean, that way you land on the ground, you're ready to go. If you don't do that, for example, and you're going to Europe, it's going to take you an average of 7 days to get acclimated to the new time zones and all the rest of the stuff. So really consider that. Third approach, how are you going to travel? Are you going to take a tour like a trip on the Rhine or through Czechoslovakia or whatever? There are those, the cruise lines. There's also the travel buses, and I'm not a bus fan. I don't like being crammed on a bus with a bunch of people. But it's a cheap way to go, and their itineraries tend to be very, very good. An example would be Trafalgar. Another thing to plan your trip with, if you don't find what you want, is a group called Tours by Locals. And we've used them all around the world, and local people, kind of as a secondary job, do tours. That's good because you get the transportation, you get everything all in one big trip. And it's really amazing where you can find it. So with that in mind, you can pretty much plan a good trip. But it really depends on you. If you can take a bunch of people and you don't mind being in a crowd of 40 people, most of whom will show up late when it's time to go from one site to the other, it's a deal. If you go private, yeah, you're going to spend a lot more money, but with private, you can change the itinerary and you can go where you want to go. Okay, I'm tired of this place. Can we go here, there, and everywhere else? Where this worked out, for example, is we took a private tour to Pompeii. And I thought, well, okay, Pompeii, a lot of tourists, neat place to go. What else? Herculaneum, right next to Pompeii, where the city is far less destroyed. You get to see things like lead plumbing and where the Caesar put plaques on the walls saying so and so was free or whatever. Great way to go. The Palace of Oplontis, Nero's wife, who I guess he didn't hang out with. He hung out with, I think, girlfriends or whatever. But it's absolutely incredible, and it's buried in the middle of a town, and they're trying to, excavate it. But it's got fantastic frescoes and everything else. Okay, I've kind of touched on things I like. So what Bernie asked was, what are your 6 favorite places? There is not a single place that I've been that has been disappointing. I mean, every place we've been, I really liked. For example, we went to Poland, specifically Krakow, right next to Auschwitz. Did we go to Auschwitz? No, we've been to Dachau and Birkenwald and some of the others. So we stayed away from that tourist trap and instead went to Polish national parks, castles, etc. In fact, we were planning to go to the Ukraine, but we didn't have enough time. But Poland is a winner. It's goes under the year under their own currency. They didn't convert to the euro. Prices are dirt cheap. For example, you buy a pretzel on the street in Germany, which I used to do for years. A buttered pretzel sold by an ex-soldier with one leg, and it's like, well, they're now $2.50 each. You get the same pretzel in Krakow for 20 cents. So you need to consider exchange rates. What are you going to go with? We used to take a family of 4 out for dinner in Germany for $20. I don't know what that is in marks, but now that same thing costs pretty much close to 100. The train, for example, great way to travel. But if you're going to travel by train, check the country's rail passes. You can save a lot of money there. Why? Because when I used to go from Stuttgart to Heidelberg or Nuremberg, it was $20. It's now $280. So if you're going to ride the train, you really need to look at a rail pass. Now, let's look at the countries. I'm kind of biased, but we love Germany. Germany has got so much to offer, and if you're looking at going to Germany, I would highly recommend you go to Nuremberg and Heidelberg. I mean, you've got your castles, you've got your old cities, you've got just incredible stuff. Prices, they've gone up, but on the other hand, if you go tours by locals and you have your travel agent, by the way, I love travel agents. I've used the same one for 20 years, and she makes hotel reservations and takes care of all that. So you go from point A to point B, and then you spin off on the side to go to whatever city you want to go to. We were also lived in Kaiserslautern for a long time. I'm not a real fan of Kaiserslautern. Right now, it's the largest U.S. military base in the world. What's neat about Kaiserslautern, though, is it's a 20-minute drive to France to Michelin restaurants. And if you like being in the French-German area, the Alsatian area, and everything else, Kaiserslautern's a good place to go. A great place to go. You want to see Roman ruins, but you don't want to go to Rome? Go to Trier in Germany, where you have the original city gate, etc., the Colosseums. You've got all this stuff. Rothenburg, the old walled city, great thing to do. In fact, we're getting ready to take the grandkids to Europe next year. And we've asked them what they want to see. And of course, my wife said, okay, this is what we are going to see. Show them a walled city, show them a castle. You interested in wine? There are all kinds of wine tours. There's what they call the Weinstrasse in Germany, that you go basically from winery to winery to winery. And I already mentioned, the river barges, which are really huge cruise ships, where there are castles absolutely everywhere. So there's Germany. Okay, I'm going to go over 6 because my grandson said he wanted to go to see the Eiffel Tower. Well, the Eiffel Tower is a hunk of steel. I mean, it's not a big deal if you've been there a couple of times. And I don't like heights. But then the question becomes, how do you squeeze that in travel time between Germany and France? You got to remember that if you're going to take the train somewhere or you're going to fly somewhere, You're going to pay big bucks, number one, but number two, you're basically going to take a day out of your trip. And you have to plan on that. So we're playing around now. You fly into Orly, France, see the Eiffel Tower, fly on the next day to Nuremberg or take the train to Nuremberg. But you see, that's 2 travel days already taken out of the trip. Or do you go to Nuremberg and on your way home, do you stop off in Paris, which I've also done. But then again, I kind of sit back and go, well, if you're going to go to France, then you need to go to Brittany, the coast, to eat the fantastic food, or you want to go to Versailles or the Trianon or somewhere else. So, it's kind of a painful thing, and you need to decide what you're going to accept. Are you going to go to France just to see the Eiffel Tower? That's a day out of your trip and 2 days travel if you're going on to Germany. Okay, that comes to mind. Favorite places. I absolutely adore New Zealand. The people are incredible. The prices are cheap. We drove all day down the West Coast before we swung around and came north, and we never saw another person. We saw thousands of sheep, but we never saw another person. You've got glaciers. You've got the best fishing in the world, trout, salmon, you name it. And by the way, it's kind of interesting. It's really, until recently, it was really hard to buy New Zealand or Australian fish because they didn't allow commercial fishing. So what you would do is you'd go fishing yourself and give it to your hotel or restaurant. Many are linked together and they would cook it for you. Otherwise, it was illegal. But incredible mountains, rivers, views, the Maori culture, incredible, absolutely incredible. And a close incredible is Australia. Now, the problem with Australia is everybody says, well, I'll just fly to Australia, and I'll go to Sydney, and then I'll go to Perth, and then I'll go to the Red Desert, to Uluru, otherwise known as Ayers Rock. You can't do that. The country is so big that you literally have to do it in 2 trips. One half of the country, the other half of the country. Otherwise, your whole trip is going to be taken up by travel. The distances are unbelievable. Just to get to Uluru, if I remember correctly, it was a 3.5-hour flight from Sydney. But on the flip side, Sydney is a fantastic city. Incredible food. It's basically on the ocean. You got, of course, Bonsai Beach, the famous nude beach. It's got everything you would ever look for, perverter, traveler, alike. So New Zealand and Australia are really big on my list. Of course, everybody wanted to go to Italy. I love Italy, love the food. You got the Colosseums, you got everything, but you have a tourist traffic that's unbelievable. And you're going to probably end up with a group somewhere, and everybody's going to stand in the way, taking a selfie while you're trying to get a picture. So that's kind of a problem. I'd like to go to Italy. My wife wants to go to Germany. The grandkids wanted to go to Greece. But I told them, Greece is on the other side of Europe. And just to get there is going to eat up 2 days, a day coming, a day going. So you got to look at the distance. You got to look at the connections. Just because you'd like to go there, don't think you can do it in one trip. And when we're talking about Greece, I go back to what I said earlier. If you're going to go to Greece, you want to go to the Greek islands. Why go to just Athens? For example, we went to the Oracle of Delphi. That was an all-day trip, but it was neat. The museum was absolutely incredible. But if you're not interested in Greek whatever, then you could probably go to Athens, but it's terribly, terribly crowded and polluted. And if you go up on the hill to the temple and stuff, you've eaten up another day just to go to one place. So sit down, figure out kind of on a point thing, what you want to see, then you want to prioritize them, and you want to come up with the best way to hook them all together. none of it's easy. You know, if you expect that you're going to plan a neat trip and you're going to go wandering off on your own, like you might do on a cross-country trip in the States, it ain't going to happen. Now, favorite place surprises. I guess I would start off with Bhutan, the land of happiness. It's in the Himalayas. Uh, it's, well, I can't explain. They don't use the gross national product to figure out how well they're doing as a country. They use gross national happiness. And the king, who wanders through town and greets, his citizens. I never got greeted. I guess I'm not one of the citizens, but he goes around and just makes sure people are happy. It's a Buddhist country. I looked at their version of Buddhism more as a kind of a Hindu type thing, but it's a beautiful country. Again, if you don't like altitudes, that's probably not where you want to go. When we went, I don't know what, 6 years ago, it was there was almost no place to stay. They build a lot of hotels and stuff now, but there didn't used to be that many places to stay. They were kind of like, well, some kind of reminded me of a tourist Buddhist temple like I've stayed at in Chiang Mai in Thailand. But the people are absolutely incredible. Again, if you go there, what are you going to go want to see? Well, you got the Lion Fortress up in the mountains. That's an all-day trip. You know, you can drive around to different cities, of which there aren't much because they don't have traffic lights or anything. So again, you need to study up and see if something piques your interest instead of just going and being dropped. And if you are dropped, oh, and by the way, I might be mistaken, but when we went, it was about 6 months after the country opened. When I say opened, tourism was illegal. You couldn't get into the country. Well, you can get into the country now, but the visa fee, if I'm not mistaken, is $200 a day. And that's how the government makes money. So you need to plan on stuff like that. Don't just, first of all, you can't go to Bhutan unless you go with it or you're hooked up with a government certified translator / guide. The second thing is, if you don't really read up, you're going to show up in country and you're going to be hit with a $200 a day rate. When we were there, and I understand it's still the same, backpacking was illegal. In other words, you had to go with government guide. They don't want hippies, quote unquote, just showing up and going on a quick trip. But it's really well worth it. If nothing else, landing at the airport, of which there's one, and the king owns the airline, and only certain pilots are allowed to fly into it. You go through the Himalayas and you see Mount Everest in the back, and you go back and forth. Then you come in through the valley, and all of a sudden you drop like a rock, and you skid down the runway and almost fall off the end, which is another many thousand-foot drop. But if you want to see another side of the world, as opposed to going to Afghanistan or Pakistan or any of those countries, strongly recommend it, but it's expensive. Now, how do you get there? Well, as I said, you can only go with the government airline. And so what most people do, and we did it, you get a hotel at the airport in Bangkok. Again, that's a day shot. Then you go to the airport, fly to Bhutan. When you come back, you reverse the procedure. But then again, the issue comes to mind. If you're going to go to Bangkok, look at all the neat places to see in Thailand. You've got Chiang Mai. You've got, Pattaya Beach. You've got, just incredible stuff. So again, you need to figure out what you want to do and plan for it. Now, Bangkok has a lot of different tours you can take. Oh, you want to go to Ayutthaya, the old capital, north of Bangkok. Oh, God, I mean, I could go on and on. So let's switch to another surprise that we really loved, and people always go, where is it? Why did you go? And that's Patagonia. Okay, Patagonia is in the far south of South America, and it's split between Argentina and Chile. And by the way, they don't get along very well. So you might have trouble switching from one border to the other. What's neat though, and a friend of mine just got back from there, is if you go further south, which we did because the only way we could fly out of that area because it's so sparsely populated, there's a place called Punta Arenas, and that's where all the Arctic explorers took off from. There's a tremendous amount of history and culture. Some of the old homes of the old merchants, many of whom were today's equivalent of billionaires, are turned into museums. And it's really incredible because you're talking about places 100 years old and older, and they actually had hot water. You know, they ate canned foods brought in from Europe. Uh, the parks and everything are absolutely incredible. You can just wander through the parks and you can look for handicrafts or the free concerts. See, that's another thing about a lot of these places. Oslo being a prime example, Oslo, Norway. You've got free concerts in the park. And as you're wandering through the park, looking at world-class statuary and whatever, there's a band playing. That's also common in Germany. So those are two places that I'd really like seeing. Now, kind of a warning, and it takes me up to 7, but I'm right on schedule, and that is Easter Island. My wife wants to go to Easter Island. Well, guess what, guys? You can't go for a day because you have to basically fly from Santiago, Chile to Easter Island, which is an all-day flight. And then once you get there, you have to stay for 3 days at the only hotel on the island. I think there's still only one. The way I look at it, if you're going to go see a bunch of statues, I think one day more than does it. So I figure I went to National Geographic and I said, can we shorten your trip? You know, where we only spend a day in Easter Island and then maybe we hopscotch back to, you know, Atacama Desert in Chile. Nope, it's all arranged, can't change it. That's the way it is. So if you always wanted to see Easter Island, plan on seeing it 3 times over. Now, if you do want to go see some rock statues and stuff, you can always go to Chuck out in the middle of the Pacific, some of the remote Pacific islands where they've got, you know, the same type of thing. And I guess I'll just throw this in for what it's worth. If you do want to go to Pacific Islands and you're not into the crowds in Bali or wherever else, you've got Koh Rai, Mazzaro, and some of the other islands, most of which I've been to, and that's an incredible experience also. But the first thing I would say in summary is, what do you want to see? That's going to be your goal. Next level down, your objective. How are you going to see it? Next level down, who's going to do what to whom, when, where, how, and why. You can't just show up and expect everything to be the way it is. You know, you can't just show up and expect that you're going to have a pizza for dinner. You're going to show up and you're not going to find people in a lot of these places who speak any English. So, you know, it's not like going to the United States. You know, travel, overseas travel is a different experience that you're really immersing yourself in. And if you're not willing to do that and you expect things like electric power that doesn't go off at 6 at night, then you're probably not going to be a happy traveler. Or how about the sink where the water drains right on the floor? That's the way it is. You know, all of a sudden you feel your feet getting wet. Well, that's because the drain from the sink just runs out on the floor. Okay, I did my 30 minutes. How did I do?
Did fine, Dick. Except you snuck in 7.
Yeah, I know. Man, I could have snuck in a hell of a lot more.
And where did Oslo, Norway come from? Is that 8?
No, the Prime Minister of Norway was on TV last night talking about what he thinks needs to be done in Ukraine. So that was just at the top of my mind. But Oslo, aside from being one of the most expensive cities in Europe, is a real culture center in terms of art and the rest of the stuff. But again, when you go to Oslo, you want to take a lake tour because a lot of people live along the lakes. And it's another great place to go, particularly if you like seafood. Of course, if you like seafood, I'd also recommend Halifax, Nova Scotia, where lobster is $4, whereas in a restaurant it's 30.
Are you done, Dick?
I'm done. It's your fault. You started it.
Okay, folks. I've traveled extensively in the United States, primarily on business. But most of the places, venues on my list of the top 6, I've done with family, save for one. I'll explain that. My first choice, I'm going to frame it this way. If the good Lord will be good enough to let me go to heaven, and if he were to say to me, you can pick your heaven from a place on earth that you thought was tantamount to heaven, I would pick Yosemite National Park. And in particular, Yosemite Valley. You have the valley and then you have the high country. Most of the visit, and I've visited the high country like Tuolumne Meadows, and most of the people that go up into the high country are either taking the John Muir Trail to eventually go into the back country. But in terms of what I could do through all eternity, it would be to nestle in Yosemite Valley, and I would ask the good Lord that the Ahwahnee Hotel be my place of habitation, and that he make it so that the Ahwahnee Hotel would hold up and be maintained through all eternity. Now,
May I cut in there? For those that haven't been to that hotel, and they've heard about the Yellowstone Hotel and some of the others, the Ahwahnee is the most incredible hotel in the world. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay, sorry.
well, just further to that point, and I credit my wife, she got the family reservations, and it took some real doing. It wasn't something you just dial a number and get it set up. I can't recall if it was a lottery. It may well have been, but we went to the Ahwahnee Hotel and had Thanksgiving dinner in their beautiful dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out on a scenic view of the valley, and these gorgeous chandeliers. And believe it or not, as they were serving the main course, snow started falling with some of the biggest snowflakes I've ever seen. But there are so many vistas, the most famous being what's called the tunnel view of the valley, where you come in through the southern entrance, come through a tunnel, and there's an immediate turnout to the left as you come out of the tunnel, in which you can see the entire length and breadth of the valley. And it's stunning. I've photographed it multiple times, and professional photographers like Ansel Adams, who is famous for his black and white photos of Yosemite, has documented the beauty of the valley. But on the left, you have, as you view the valley, you have the imposing granite monolith of El Capitan. And that's where world-class climbers go. Many of them, I think the term is free scaling, but they do it. It's unbelievable, but they do it without rope, and go from the floor of the valley to the top of El Capitan. Looking to your right, as you look on the valley, you see Bridal Veil Falls, and behind it, a somewhat less imposing, but a more unique granite structure, which is called Half Dome. And the reason it's sheared in half is from the glaciers that form the valley. And as some who listen to our podcast may immediately say to themselves, it was John Muir who explored the valley and came up with a view that at the time was felt by many geologists to be incorrect. But it turns out that the valley was indeed formed by glaciers during the Ice Age. And many of its features were formed by those glaciers. Bridal Veil Falls is prominent and can be seen on the right side as you view the valley. And on the left side are Yosemite Falls, which rain down from El Capitan and are the tallest falls in America. In fact, it may well be North America. I believe it's the tallest in North America. A ribbon running through the valley floor, through the meadows, and bookended on either side by conifer forests is the Merced River, which is just gorgeous. And I love the valley floor for photography. Of most, and I've visited many national parks, Yosemite is, to me, the most memorable. It changes with the changing light. It changes by the season. For one thing, the best time to go is late spring, because that's when you begin having the snow melt and the waterfalls are magnificent and full. There are two more key waterfalls that you can hike to going up the John Muir Trail. The first is Vernal Falls, and the second above it is Nevada Falls, and they're both stunning. So I'm enraptured by the place. I haven't been back in a long time. I'm getting up in years, but it may sound corny, but I think of Yosemite quite often. And particularly as I think about my own mortality, I'd love to be able to get back there. Number 2 on my list may be a bit of a wild card, but I hope folks will think about it. I'd say the second place to go is Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. Certainly not for many of the people there, and that's all I'll say on that topic. But for the beauty, I'd suggest going in the spring when the cherry blossoms are blooming. And by the way, many of those trees that make the city absolutely stunning and gorgeous were gifts from Japan. And I know that's one of your favorite places, Jack. So you want to see the cherry trees. You'll want to see the memorials. The obvious ones, the prominent ones are the George Washington Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, Thomas Jefferson Memorial, and then the various wars, the Vietnam Memorial, Korean War Memorial, World War II Memorial. There's recently been the addition of the Martin Luther King statue. I for one, and because I've read about it and I like military history, I could stand and look at the Iwo Jima Memorial for hours. And that one really gets to me. I'm sure Dick, who was a Vietnam veteran, is very much would be very much touched by the Vietnam Memorial and all the things that people leave there. In fact, from a people watching perspective, once you've gotten a sense of the beauty and architecture of the Vietnam Memorial, the people watching is special, just to see how people react. You can tell those that have either lost fellow soldiers in the war or family members, but it really gives you a sense of the sacrifice. The other things, of course, are the the White House, the Capitol building, and the mall I mentioned, and certainly the Smithsonian Museum. And there is now a Holocaust Museum, which I have not seen. I've been to Washington, D.C. Probably 3-4 times, but not since that was built. But apart from the people who work in DC, the city itself is a stunning capital and one we should be proud of. Third on my list would be Sequoia National Park. And the easiest way to explain why I've selected that as number 3 is because of the giant sequoias. And they are not, folks, redwoods. Redwoods are separate and distinct from sequoia trees. Sequoia trees are the largest trees on the planet Earth. And while there are sequoias elsewhere on the western side of the Sierra Nevada in the state of California, the largest tree is the General Sherman tree. It's the largest in volume of any living thing in the world. Now, sequoia trees are not the oldest trees on Earth, but they can live up to about 3,400 years. And that'd be kind of nice to live through the ages and see all that those trees have seen. But when you first see a giant sequoia, they really take your breath away. Apart from the size, the bark is very thick and it's kind of a red-orange tint, whereas most of your mixed conifer trees have the darker bark. So they really stand out, and they're just stunning. And then when you stand at the base and look up, as tall as they get, you can see limbs, 300 feet up that look like what would be a very large tree in the forest. And those are just tree limbs. So again, I think that's a place to go, and particularly to take your kids. Number 4, this you may think is quirky for the top 6. It might be in the top 100. But for me personally, it's in the top 6, and that's Gettysburg National Military Park. And the reason I've selected it is because I have an interest in the Civil War, that historical era in United States history, certainly in Abraham Lincoln. If you go to Gettysburg, you get the real sense of what the Civil War meant. Many people presume, and it's kind of a superficial presumption, that the Civil War was fought primarily to free the slaves. And in point of fact, it was to preserve the Union. And I'm not saying that to denigrate the freeing of the slaves, but I am saying that the majesty of the Civil War is that American fought against American, some feeling that it was right and proper at the time to secede, and Lincoln and the Union side of the war believing that in the best interests of the country, we needed to be one. And we wouldn't be what we are today had it not been for the Civil War. And we would have not won the Civil War had it not been for Gettysburg. It was the seminal battle in the Civil War that really turned the tide in the Union's favor after many Confederate victories. A lot of people who have a sketchy history of the Civil War think that that was Robert E. Lee's and the Army of North Virginia, its first incursion into the northern states. It actually was the second. The first was into Maryland, and that campaign ended with the Battle of Antietam, which was the bloodiest day of the single day of the Civil War. And by contrast, on his second incursion into the North, and it was Lee's intention to prove to the North, and particularly to the Congress, that the Union was fighting a lost cause, and he intended to decimate the Union Army. It turned out it was a 3-day battle, July 1st through 3rd in 1863, hot as hell, humid as hell. And the loss over those 3 days was the greatest loss in terms of life and, the number of dead, the number of wounded in American military history. And we as Americans should take pause and think about that just in 3 days' time. that statement, is against the backdrop of the Revolutionary War, the World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and so forth. The terrain in the little town of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania is interesting. Now, before you go there, and it's a great place to take the family, I would suggest that you read a book, kind of like some movies demand that you read the book before you go and see the screenplay. But it's The Killer Angels, and you can buy it on Amazon. In terms of a one-volume historical treatment of the Civil War, I regard it as, if not the best, among the very best. And then once you have that knowledge, then you'll be able to understand the national park and the various places and what happened on day one, what happened on day two, and what happened on day three. And day three, by the way, was Pickett's charge, which was right at the center of the line. And Lee made a horrible mistake on day three in sending Pickett into the heart of the Yankee line. And they lost something like 6,000 troops just on that day alone. And it was a march across an open field, and they were decimated by artillery. Let's see, am I doing okay on time, Dick?
You're doing great, but can I add something?
Sure.
Okay, I wanted to, because Washington, that never really entered my mind, but for those that want to go to Washington, the cherry blossoms are in max bloom right now as we speak. Another place that's really worth going to, particularly if you're interested in rocks, like the Blue Diamond, the National History Museum. Absolutely incredible. Oh, and the Air and Space Museum.
Yeah, there are a number of them. In the interest of time, I didn't want to go through the laundry list, but you could easily spend, well, just for starters, a week. And by the way, I'm glad you interrupted, because I would have been remiss. To visit Arlington National Cemetery will bring tears to your eyes. It overwhelms the senses of the loss this country has taken in men and women who have protected our freedom. And when, as a backdrop, you listen to the craziness and the superficiality of politics today, and that's all I'll say. And then you see the solemnity and the beauty of Arlington National Cemetery across the bridge. I've been there 3 times. I've watched the changing of the guard, but it's just a stunning place. And many people don't know this, so I'll add this little note. That used to be the estate of Robert E. Lee. And the Union confiscated that estate and from him, and then turned it into a national cemetery for the military. That's also where John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy are buried. I just should make mention of that. People Dick's age and my age remember that well. We were in high school when Kennedy was assassinated, and we were in college when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And if you had any feeling about those two events, they're buried there.
You got 10 more minutes.
Okay, then I'm right on track. Number 5, and I won't have a lot to say here, but don't presume because I'm saying less than I did on the first 4 that I'm any less enamored of this place. It's Grand Teton National Park. Now, quickly, right next to Grand Teton National Park to the north is Yellowstone. And if we do any subsequent podcasts and add to our list, Dick, I'll definitely be putting Yellowstone on my list. But Yellowstone has, principally known for its geothermal features. What's stunning about the Grand Tetons is that you get one gorgeous view of a mountain range, and I've not been like Dick has to Europe, but I get the sense that if I could go to Switzerland, I may be seeing something akin to the Grand Tetons. The peaks aren't rounded, they're jagged. There are glaciers. And then I guess I don't guess, this is a fact. What makes the Grand Tetons so stunning in terms of a landscape view is that there are no foothills. With most of our mountain ranges, there are foothills, and the foothills gradually take you into the mountains and then into the higher elevations. But from the valley floor to the highest peaks, no foothills. If you've seen the classic Western Shane, you've seen the Tetons. And if you've seen Shane, and by the way, that would be on my top 5 lists of greatest Western movies ever made. You can rent or buy Shane. You'll get a view of the Tetons. And I hope that will not satisfy you, but rather encourage you to want to go there. There are a lot of features there. Jackson Hole, Wyoming is a great place to go. But in terms of just one breathtaking view of a mountain range without having to really get up into them, just to stand there by the Snake River as an example and peer up at those mountains, and particularly in the early morning or the late afternoon when the light is playing on them and affecting them more. The Grand Tetons is something you'll never forget for the rest of your life. Absolutely breathtaking. Now, the last is the only one I have not treated my family to. I've been there a number of times on business. And I'll say it this way. If you haven't been there, put it on your bucket list. But you need to see the New York City skyline. If the Tetons are the view of a majestic, unique mountain range that I just described, if I'm accurate in that description, New York City, in terms of a metropolitan area, a major city of the United States, is beyond anything you'll see in any city, anywhere in the continental US, or I would argue even in Hawaii, although Hawaii is gorgeous. And what I'm referring to is the obvious. There's more skyscrapers there than the mind can really behold. And I would suggest two things. One, and I'm a guy, I've flown for 3.5 decades on business and always tried to get an aisle seat. But if I am flying into New York City, I want to sit in a window seat. To see New York City as you descend is an unbelievable view. Seeing, the top of those skyscrapers, New York Central Park, the East River, the Hudson River, the bridges. By all means, do that. That'll be your first taste of it. And then once on the ground, I'd suggest two things. Either the ferry boats that will give you, a water view, a low view that you can look up at the majesty of that skyline, or, and I've not been there yet, may not get there, but the new tower that replaced, it's called the Freedom Tower, that replaced the Twin Towers that were knocked down on 9/11. I believe it's somewhere around the 100th, 103rd floor of the Freedom Tower. There are restaurants, observation decks, and you get a gorgeous view of all of New York. The last thing I would say, we've all seen in movies, in magazines, the Statue of Liberty. If you've seen Godfather, the Godfather trilogy, you see when Don Vito Corleone as a little boy is coming in by ship, and everybody on the ship deck is looking up at the Statue of Liberty. But to see it yourself, that to me, I get choked up when I see it, and that's one of the wonderful things about New York, along with the great Jewish delis.
Oh, Katz's,
Yeah, I've been to Katz's, I have.
that place is incredible.
Yeah, best pastrami sandwich I've ever had. And you needed a ladder to climb from the tabletop to the top piece of bread.
Yeah.
They're so thick. But anyways, so what I've tried to do here is a few national parks. One of the most poignant battlefields that's right here in the United States. You don't have to go overseas to see it. And America's greatest city, I purposely didn't say plan a week in New York because there's been so much bad press about what's happened in New York in recent years. I'll just leave it to those who might want to go to New York City. They don't need to listen to me to decide what they want to do, but first things first, get a panoramic view of that skyline, and particularly at night with all the lights. It's stunning. And those are my top 6, Dick.
And you are right on the minute, but I have to add another thing, and that is when I was young, we went to Glacier National Park, and I was really impressed and said it was really neat. But then I saw the Big Tit, and I got to tell you, I agree with you. Grand Teton is so under whatever.
Underrated.
Yeah, I mean, it's to my mind one of the most beautiful places on earth.
If you were to ask, like on a man on the street interview, name the 5 or 6 top national parks that people have been to and would go back to, or if they hadn't been to many, which ones were on their bucket list. I think the Tetons get overlooked, that they're kind of an afterthought. People thinking about going to Wyoming think of Yellowstone.
Yes.
And they don't say the Grand Tetons, but to me, not having been to Europe, it looks different than any mountain range I've seen in the United States. It looks like what I presume a mountain range might look like in Europe that distinguishes it from, the Appalachians, the Smoky Mountains, I should say, or some of the other, the Sierra Nevada. It is part of the Rocky Mountains, but certainly different than how the Rocky Mountains look from the eastern side, the eastern perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to show this to my wife because, we've talked about going to the mainland, the United States, and seeing some of this where she actually grew up. So it was neat. It was fascinating. It was informative. It was fun.
I hope God listens to our podcast, Dick.
Well, I would hope so.
I'm sure heaven is something beyond any of our imaginations, but I'd be quite content. Now I'm going to be rotten here. Dear Lord, chase all the people out of the valley and only let those in that are my family members or closest friends, provided they want to go there. We'll live in the Ahwahnee and we'll see nothing but beauty every day, natural beauty.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you say goodbye so that you don't get cut off.
Okay, well, appreciate everybody watching. Leave us a comment or write to us, but we upload these podcasts on YouTube, so you can leave a comment. And if you want more of these as opposed to politics, we'll return to this kind of theme periodically, because sometimes the politics does get old. I enjoy doing something different today. And well, in deference to Dick, and if I heard him right, top on his list was, I guess it was Poland, wasn't it? And then Germany? Or did you say Germany would be your first choice?
Well, Germany, because we lived there for 17 years, would be my first choice.
Okay, then in deference to you, I'll close by saying Auf Wiedersehen.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Ich spreche nur ein wenig Deutsch.
Ja, nein, Deutsch ist der Geschmack meines Vaterlands.